Tonight, winter moves slowly across the land, quiet and deliberate, like a presence that does not need to announce itself. Snow drifts downward in soft layers, covering roads, rooftops, and memories alike. The river below runs dark and heavy, its surface tightening under the cold, breathing less with every passing hour. At the center of it all stands the bridge. It stretches from one shore to the other with absolute confidence, a long spine of steel and stone that has carried generations without hesitation. People cross it without looking, without thinking, trusting it the way they trust the ground beneath their feet. For decades, it has endured storms, floods, heat, and cold. It has never bent, never broken. Tonight feels no different to those who sleep nearby, but winter is patient, and patience given enough time can overcome even the strongest things ever built. The bridge was designed in an era that believed strength could be calculated, measured, and mastered. Every beam was thicker than required. Every bolt was tightened beyond standard limits. Stone pillars were sunk deep into the riverbed, anchored into layers of earth that had not seen daylight in thousands of years. Workers labored through summers of dust and winters of frost. Their hands cracked in the cold, their backs bent beneath the weight of iron. Day after day they raised something meant to outlast them all. When the final piece was set in place, the bridge did not creak or sway. It stood perfectly still, as if it had always been there. Engineers inspected it, tested it, loaded it far beyond what it would ever carry. It held. Always. Soon the bridge became invisible through familiarity. Trains thundered across it before dawn. Trucks crossed at midday. Footsteps echoed in the evening. The bridge absorbed it all without complaint, without rest. Below, the river flowed as it always had, sometimes calm, sometimes violent, but always watching. Every winter tested the bridge. Ice formed around its pillars, snow packed against its sides, metal tightened in the cold, then loosened again in spring. Each year the bridge survived, and each year trust in it grew stronger. No one considered that strength can age. No one imagined that winter was learning, slowly, patiently, how the bridge responded to cold. Tonight the temperature continues to fall. Ice begins to gather earlier than usual, pressing gently at first, almost respectfully, against the stone. The bridge does not react. It has never needed to. Yet, deep within its structure, far from human eyes, tiny forces begin to shift. So small they feel meaningless. Winter does not rush. Winter never rushes. The river had been flowing beneath the bridge long before the first stone was ever laid. It had carved its path slowly, season by season, carrying silt, branches, and memories from distant places. It knew the weight of mountains melting in spring and the silence of deep freezes in winter. When the cold tightened its grip this year, the river changed its voice. Water slowed, thickened, and then surrendered to ice. Sheets formed along the banks first, pale and fragile. Then they reached toward the center, locking together with soft, grinding sounds that echoed beneath the bridge's span. Each night the ice grew thicker, heavier, more determined. Around the bridge's pillars the ice gathered differently. It did not drift away, it stayed. Pressure built in quiet layers, pushing not all at once but steadily, an unbroken touch that never relaxed. The stone pillars resisted as they always had. They had been shaped to break currents, to divide force, to stand unmoved. But ice did not behave like water. It did not flow around obstacles. It pressed against them, expanding when the temperature dropped, tightening its hold with each degree lost. Far above, vehicles continued crossing, The bridge carried them without complaint, unaware that the balance below was changing. At night, the river made new sounds, low, distant cracks that traveled through the ice like whispers. Each sound marked a shift, a rearranging of frozen weight. The ice was no longer just cold water. It had become a structure of its own, leaning against the bridge as if seeking support. No alarms sounded. No warnings were issued. The river remembered winters when ice had broken bridges before. It remembered patience. It remembered that pressure does not need speed to succeed. By morning, frost coated the bridge's railings. Snow filled every seam. The cold had settled in with no intention of leaving. And beneath it all, the river waited. Morning arrived slowly, filtered through pale winter light and a drifting fog. The bridge emerged from the gray in pieces. First its highest arch, then its cables, then the long roadway dusted with snow. From a distance, it looked unchanged, as solid and dependable as ever. Up close, small details told a quieter story. Frost clung to joints where metal met metal, thicker than usual, settling into spaces designed to move freely. Expansion seams, built to breathe with temperature, had grown stiff and unresponsive. They did not open and close as smoothly as they once had. A maintenance worker crossed the bridge on foot just after sunrise. His boots crunched softly on the frozen surface. He paused once, resting a gloved hand against the railing, listening. Beneath the normal winter sounds, there was something else, a deep, drawn-out groan that seemed to come from far below. He told himself it was the ice shifting in the river. That happened every winter. Still, he slowed his pace, eyes scanning the structure as if it might reveal its thoughts. Nothing looked broken. Sensors embedded in the bridge sent their data as usual. Stress readings hovered just below thresholds. Temperatures were cold, but not unprecedented. Everything on paper was acceptable. The worker filed a note anyway, not urgent, just cautious. The bridge had earned caution. By midday, traffic increased. Trucks heavy with supplies rolled across, their weight pressing down in long, steady waves. The bridge absorbed it all, distributing force the way it was designed to do. Yet with every passing hour the cold tightened. Metal contracted. Ice pressed harder. The forces within the bridge began to take longer to settle after each load, like a body that needed more time to recover. No one noticed. From the shore, the bridge still looked eternal. Snow continued to fall lightly, softening edges, hiding strain beneath a quiet white layer. Winter had begun to speak. Only the bridge was listening. By evening, the sky darkened into a solid wall of cloud. Snow no longer drifted. It fell with purpose, thick and unrelenting. Wind moved through the bridge's structure, threading itself between cables and beams, setting them into a low, constant hum. The storm settled in as if it had claimed the place. Lights along the roadway cast pale halos through the snowfall, their glow swallowed quickly by the night. Each flake added weight, layer upon layer, pressing down on surfaces already stiff with cold. Snow packed into corners where heat from passing vehicles could no longer reach. Below, the river ice locked more tightly against the pillars. What had once been separate sheets fused into a single mass, stretching from bank to bank. The ice no longer shifted freely. It leaned. The bridge adjusted as it always had, redistributing stress through its frame. But the adjustments were smaller now, slower. Metal resisted movement it once allowed. Joints held tension longer before releasing it. Inside the structure, stress followed unfamiliar paths. Late that night, a sound traveled through the steel, too low to be heard by most, too brief to draw attention. A single bolt tightened decades earlier and never questioned, shifted by a fraction no human instrument could measure. The bridge remained standing. Traffic thinned as the storm worsened. Snowplows crossed less frequently. For brief moments, the bridge was almost alone with the winter. Wind howled. Ice pressed. Cold deepened. Winter was no longer passing through. It had decided to stay. Just after midnight, the storm softened. Snow still fell, but more gently now, as if winter had finished what it came to do and no longer needed force. The bridge stood wrapped in white, its shape blurred beneath the layers of ice and frost. Silence settled in. It was the kind of silence that makes small sounds feel enormous. Somewhere within the structure, metal shifted as temperatures dropped another degree. Steel contracted, pulling inward against bolts and plates that could no longer move freely. Then came the sound, not loud, not sharp. A deep, distant crack that traveled through the bridge's body like a slow wave. It did not echo outward. It sank inward, absorbed by stone and snow. A stress point had crossed a line it had never crossed before. The bridge did not collapse. It did not even visibly change, but something essential had been altered. Load no longer traveled the same paths. Forces began to concentrate where they had once been shared. Below, the river ice responded with its own low groans, as if answering. The cold pressed on, unmoved by what it had caused. Winter had not struck in anger. It had simply waited until the bridge could no longer adapt. Above the bridge, the moon slipped between clouds, casting a pale light over the frozen span. To any passing eye, it still looked strong, still reliable, still permanent. Only the bridge knew the truth. It was holding itself together now, not with confidence, but with effort. Morning returned quietly, as if unaware of what had shifted in the night. Snow plows cleared narrow paths across the bridge, their blades scraping ice from steel. The sound traveled far, echoing through beams that were already under strain. Traffic resumed. Cars moved slowly at first, cautious on the frozen surface. Then trucks followed, long, heavy vehicles carrying fuel, food, and materials meant for places beyond the river. Each one added weight in measured intervals, a steady rhythm the bridge had known for decades. But today, the weight felt different. With every passing load, the bridge responded more slowly. Vibrations lingered longer than they should have, trembling through cables before settling. The structure still held, but it no longer returned fully to rest between crossings. Deep within the framework, stress concentrated around the place where the midnight crack had formed. Metal there had lost its flexibility. It resisted, and resistance created heat, too little to feel, but enough to weaken what remained. Drivers noticed nothing. The bridge felt solid beneath their wheels. The illusion of strength remained intact. Below, the river ice pressed higher against the pillars as temperatures rose slightly with daylight. Expansion began again, not enough to release pressure, only enough to shift it into new directions. The bridge was being pulled and pushed at the same time, downward by traffic, outward by ice, inward by the cold, still trapped inside its steel. It endured, but endurance, like strength, has limits. By late morning, the sky lightened, though the cold remained locked in place. A small inspection crew arrived, moving carefully along the edge of the bridge. Their breath fogged the air as they paused beneath joints and plates, gloved hands brushing away frost to see the metal beneath. Nothing obvious appeared wrong. No twisted beams, no visible cracks, no signs that would justify closing a bridge trusted by thousands. Yet instruments told a subtler story. Readings fluctuated more than expected. Stress levels rose quickly with each passing truck and fell too slowly after. The bridge was working harder than it should, holding tension like a tightened muscle that never fully relaxed. The crew noted the data and exchanged quiet looks. Winter conditions, they agreed. Ice load, thermal contraction, temporary effects. Temporary had always been enough. As they left, the bridge absorbed another long convoy of vehicles. The weight passed through its frame in waves, settling heavily into the same weakened region again and again. Each time, microscopic damage spread, grain by grain within the steel, invisible but irreversible. Below, the river groaned as ice shifted against stone. The sound rose through the pillars and into the bridge itself, blending with the hum of traffic and wind. By afternoon, clouds returned. Snow began to fall once more, light but steady, filling footprints, erasing signs of inspection, restoring the bridge's appearance of calm. The bridge remained open. The river remained patient. Winter remained in control. Dusk arrived early, as it does in deep winter. The sky dimmed into shades of blue and gray, and the bridge's lights flickered on one by one, stretching a glowing path across the frozen river. Snow continued to fall, thin and persistent, filling the air with quiet motion. Traffic slowed as darkness settled. Drivers kept their distance, tires humming softly against packed snow. From above, the bridge looked peaceful, almost gentle beneath its white covering. Inside the structure, forces argued with one another. The metal, still contracted from the night's cold, had not fully warmed. Ice below pressed outward as temperatures hovered just below freezing. The bridge was caught between states, unable to settle into either stability or release. At the weakened joint, the steel no longer distributed weight evenly. Each passing vehicle sent a sharp pulse through the area like a heartbeat that had become irregular. The bridge adjusted again and again, drawing on reserves built up over decades. Strength was still there, but it was being spent faster than it could recover. A long freight truck entered the bridge just as the wind shifted direction. Snow swirled sideways, reducing visibility to a narrow tunnel of light. The bridge swayed slightly, not dangerously, but enough to change how forces traveled through its frame. For a brief moment, stress aligned in the worst possible way. Deep inside the structure, something gave, not fully, not yet, but enough to change everything that followed. The bridge did not make a sound. Winter had made its decision. The change was subtle at first, so small that no human eye could have noticed it in real time. A section of the bridge lowered by less than the width of a hand. Steel plates shifted against one another where they had never shifted before. The balance that had held for decades quietly disappeared. Inside the structure, forces rushed to fill the gap. Weight that had once spread evenly now poured into a single path, overwhelming metal already weakened by cold and fatigue. The damaged joint resisted for a heartbeat longer, then surrendered. Not with violence, but with a long, tearing sound that traveled through the bridge like a breath being pulled too far. Above, vehicles slowed instinctively, drivers sensing something wrong without understanding it. Tires lost their steady rhythm. The bridge felt different, still solid, but no longer calm. Below, the river ice reacted instantly. The sudden shift sent pressure racing through frozen sheets, cracking them apart in jagged lines that glowed briefly under the bridge lights. Water surged upward, dark and heavy, swallowing fragments of ice. The bridge sagged again. This time, it did not return. Steel stretched beyond its limits. Bolts sheared. A cable snapped free, recoiling into the night with a sharp metallic cry that echoed across the frozen banks. Snow fell from the bridge in heavy curtains, pouring into the river like ash. The strongest bridge ever built had crossed a line from stress into failure. There was no stopping it now. Winter did not move. It did not need to. The bridge did not fall all at once. It failed in stages, as if unwilling to abandon its duty without resistance. One span gave way, pulling the next with it, steel screaming as decades of tension were released in seconds. The roadway twisted, guardrails tore free, vehicles skidded, some stopping just short of the breaking edge, others tilting as the ground beneath them simply disappeared. A central section dropped first, crashing into the frozen river below. Ice shattered under the impact, exploding outward in white fragments. Water surged upward, swallowing steel, stone, and snow in a violent embrace before closing again. The sound traveled for miles, a deep rolling thunder that shook windows and silenced the storm. Birds burst from trees along the banks. Lights along the bridge flickered, then went dark, one by one. Stone pillars cracked as their burden shifted unevenly. One held, another fractured, sending massive blocks into the river where they vanished beneath churning black water. Then, suddenly, it was over. What remained of the bridge hung in twisted silence, half standing, half fallen. Snow drifted down onto broken steel as gently as it had onto the intact span hours earlier. Winter did not pause to admire its work. The wind continued. Snow continued to fall. The river continued to move beneath broken ice. The strongest bridge ever built had not been defeated by force. It had been undone by time, pressure, and patience. Dawn came slowly, as if unsure whether it should reveal what had happened. Pale light spread across the river, touching twisted steel and broken stone with a softness that felt undeserved. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a stillness so deep it felt heavy. Where the bridge once stood whole, there was now absence. Sections of roadway lay folded into the river, half buried in ice and snow. Cables stretched and snapped, hanging like frozen lines against the sky. Pillars that had carried weight for generations stood cracked or broken, their strength spent. No traffic crossed, no footsteps echoed. The bridge's familiar hum was gone. Along the riverbanks, people gathered quietly. They stood at a distance, wrapped in coats, their breath rising in slow clouds. Some had crossed the bridge the night before. Some had trusted it every day of their lives. None spoke much. There was nothing to say. Emergency crews worked carefully, their movements small against the vast ruin. They listened to the ice, to the river, to the unstable remnants that still held tension within them. Winter remained a presence, sharp and watchful. The bridge had not failed in secret after all. It had failed in a way that forced everyone to stop and look. Snow continued to fall lightly, covering sharp edges, softening the scene, as if trying to return the world to quiet. But the silence was different now. It was the silence left behind when something believed to be permanent is suddenly gone. As the day stretched on, questions began to rise from the silence. Engineers arrived first, their steps careful on ice-slick ground. They studied the broken ends of beams, the torn plates, the snapped cables that once carried unimaginable weight. Gloved hands traced fractures, noting how the metal had stretched before it tore, how failure had traveled along hidden paths. Nothing about the bridge suggested poor design. The steel was thick, the bolts were sound. The stone had been placed exactly where it should have been. And yet the bridge had fallen. They spoke quietly about ice loads and thermal contraction, about fatigue that accumulates slowly, invisibly, about how winter applies force not all at once, but again and again, until resistance becomes habit instead of strength. Beneath the bridge, divers peered into dark water where pieces lay tangled beneath ice. The river moved around them, indifferent, carrying fragments downstream as it always had. From the shore, people watched the work unfold. Some felt anger, others confusion. Most felt a quiet unease, as if the ground itself had shifted under their understanding of the world. The bridge had been more than steel and stone. It had been certainty. Now, certainty lay broken in the cold. As news spread, the bridge became more than a structure that had failed. It became a line dividing before and after. Roads were rerouted, journeys lengthened, familiar routines were quietly erased. People stood along the riverbank in small groups, hands tucked into pockets, eyes fixed on the broken span. Some remembered crossing it as children, counting the seconds it took to reach the other side. Others remembered storms it had endured, how it had always seemed unmoved by the world around it. Now it lay open, exposed, its inner workings revealed like something private made public. Flowers appeared near the barriers. No signs instructed anyone to place them there. They arrived on their own, set gently into snow. The bridge had not only carried vehicles, it had carried memories, moments, and the weight of everyday life. The river flowed on, slipping past steel and stone, carrying away small fragments that would never be recovered. Ice cracked and shifted, releasing pieces of the bridge into the current. Winter did not slow. Loss settled in quietly, not with shock, but with the slow understanding that something trusted without thought was gone forever. Days passed, and winter loosened its grip just slightly. The cold remained, but the sharpest edge faded. Ice along the river began to crack more frequently, long lines spreading across its surface before breaking apart and drifting downstream. The broken bridge changed with the river. Steel darkened where snow melted and refroze. Edges softened under layers of ice and slush. What had once been a single, powerful structure became scattered shapes, some above water, some lost beneath it. Work continued carefully. Crews removed unstable sections, cutting through steel that had once been considered impossible to break. Each cut echoed across the river, a reminder that strength is not permanent. Traffic found new paths. People adjusted. They always do. Yet each morning many still looked toward the river out of habit, expecting to see the familiar line of the bridge waiting for them. Each time, absence answered instead. The river carried on, widening and narrowing with the season. Winter had done what it came to do. It did not linger to explain itself. Time, like the river, moved forward, pulling the world gently but firmly away from what had been lost. Spring arrived without ceremony. Snow thinned, retreating into dark patches along the banks. Ice broke apart more freely now, drifting downstream in slow, uneven pieces that knocked gently against the remains of the bridge before moving on. Water levels rose. The river regained its voice. What remained of the bridge looked different in daylight, without snow. Rust began to show where steel had been torn open. Stone blocks, once hidden beneath ice, lay exposed and smooth, shaped by decades of current. People came less often now. The shock had passed, replaced by something quieter, a distant ache that surfaced only when the river was particularly loud or the morning particularly still. Engineers returned with new plans, stronger materials, better allowances for ice, cold, and time. They spoke carefully now, using words like adapt and respect instead of conquer. The river listened as it always had. Winter was gone, but its lesson remained, etched into broken metal and altered roots. The bridge had been strong, but strength without flexibility had proven fragile. Nature did not need to destroy. It only needed to persist. The space where the bridge had once stretched did not remain empty for long. Survey markers appeared along the banks, thin lines and bright flags, mapping possibilities across moving water. Barges returned, not with traffic, but with tools, quiet, deliberate, careful. Construction began slowly. This time, there was no urgency to prove strength. Crews worked with patience shaped by memory. Measurements were checked, then checked again. Designs allowed for movement, for cold that tightens, and ice that presses without warning. The new plans did not assume permanence. They expected change. Each morning, steel beams rose into place against a pale sky. The river flowed beneath them, unchanged, reflecting clouds and sunlight, as if nothing extraordinary had happened there at all. From certain angles, the growing structure looked fragile compared to what had fallen, and yet it carried a different kind of confidence. People stopped to watch from the banks. They spoke quietly, not about how strong the new bridge would be, but about how long it might last if treated with care. Children asked questions. Older voices answered more slowly than before. The river continued its work, shaping stone, carrying silt, testing every choice made above it. Winter would return, everyone knew that now, but it would meet something built not to resist blindly, but to endure wisely. The absence that followed the collapse had not remained empty. It had made room for understanding. The first crossing happened without ceremony. No speeches were given, no crowds gathered in celebration. A single vehicle rolled forward at dawn, tires humming softly against the new surface. The bridge accepted the weight and held it, not rigidly, but with a subtle give designed into its form. Soon others followed. Footsteps returned, bicycles passed quietly, trucks crossed one by one, their loads measured and expected. The bridge moved with them, flexing just enough to release tension before it could gather. Below, the river flowed freely, unconcerned. It did not test the new structure immediately. It did not need to. Time would do that work. Those who crossed noticed the difference, even if they could not explain it. The bridge felt alive in a way the old one never had, responsive, aware, almost breathing beneath their feet. Winter would come again, snow would fall, ice would form. But this bridge had been built with memory in its bones, and as people reached the far side, they did not rush away. Many paused, just for a moment, looking back at the span behind them, grateful not only that it stood, but that it had learned. Evenings grew longer. Light lingered on the river, turning water into a slow ribbon of gold and gray. The new bridge stood in that light without trying to dominate it, its shape clean, its lines open to sky and weather. People crossed without fear now, though some still noticed the river more than they once had. They watched how ice formed in early winter, how it shifted and released in spring. Attention had replaced assumption. The broken pieces of the old bridge were gone, salvaged or carried away by time. Yet its presence remained, not as a warning carved into stone, but as a quiet understanding shared by those who remembered. Strength, they had learned, is not the same as endurance. Endurance listens. It yields when it must. It survives by adapting, not by standing still. Winter returned again as it always does, Snow fell, ice formed, wind moved through cables and beams, the bridge moved with it, and beneath everything the river continued, patient, watchful, unchanged, reminding the world that even the strongest things are guests here. And that lasting greatness comes not from defying nature, but from living within it.